What up, though, everybody? It's your boy Shane G. We are back with another episode of Politics as Usual right here on the Ethos Media Network. Make sure you like, you share, you subscribe for all the latest content. Today, what we're going to be discussing is the two-party system and why it's all a facade, right? So, I've been basically telling everybody, on the last few episodes of my show that there's really one party. They disguise it as two parties, but there's really only one. You can call it the Uniparty, you can call it the corporate party, you can call it the war party at this point. It doesn't really matter. They're all on the same side. Big business, war, big farm, all that kind of stuff, right? So, um, what I want to go through today is a list of things that Republicans typically are in favor of and things that Democrats are typically in favor of. And I mean the voters in this situation. Like if you go around and you ask the common Democrat or Republican what their opinion is on these various issues, the answers that you get will typically align, based on party. So, what I want to do is dispel you guys of the myth that if you're a Republican and you vote for Republicans, that you're going to get the things you want. Because that's not true. If you're a Democrat and you vote for Democrats, you're going to get the things you want. That's not true either. So that's what I'm here to dispel you guys of today. So let's go through some examples. And the first one we're going to start with is the military. So most Republicans, I say, most right wing people would describe themselves as being pro military, right? Um, they rarely. I've been seeing it more with the Ukraine situation, so shouts out to y'all. But in most situations, I would say, previous to this, they're never really against adding more money to the military budget and things of that nature. They are a lot of times against like social programs and things like that. Um, but when it comes to adding money to the budget for the military specifically, they're typically for it. Defense of the country, pro troops, pro military, all that kind of stuff, right? I think that's fair. Um, so I just want to read a quote to you, and this is from a Republican president, okay? So this was Dwight D. Eisenhower, and this is what he said. He said, in the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Now, that's a Republican who basically was warning years and years and years and years ago about what we're seeing today. The undue influence, the unwarranted influence that the military industrial complex has over our politicians and ultimately over our politics. That's why we can't get anything done here that actually helps us. It's because we're spending all our money overseas, on these military bases and, building bases all around the world and, invading countries and carrying out these drone campaigns and, essentially lending our army to Saudi Arabia for them to be carrying out this conflict that they got going on in Syria. All these things. Um, None of these things help Americans. So, you know, um, why else would they be doing them? It has to help somebody because it's not helping the people in those countries that that we're destroying either. So, who's it helping? I'll let y'all come to that conclusion. Here's another interesting one, and I'm focusing on Republicans still. Republicans, a lot of you are. There's different varying degrees to it when I say this. When I say anti immigration, I don't mean it in the same way. So, okay, let me explain. So, a lot of Republicans, like I said, there's varying degrees. There's we just don't want people to be able to come over here willy nilly and be able to, use our government resources and things like that without going through the proper channels of becoming citizens. That's one line of thought. The other line of thought tends to be, you know, if you're not from here, you shouldn't be here. You know what I mean? Let's build the wall to keep everyone out. You know what I mean? Like, there's that line of thought too, where it's like, we just don't want you here because you're not us. Um, I would say those are, and then obviously there's a lot of middle ground in there as well. So that's basically what you're gonna get from most right wing people when it comes to immigration. I think that's fair. Well, one of the most popular Republican presidents of all time, Ronald Reagan. This is what he had to say about immigration and what he did when it came to immigration. Illegal immigrants in considerable numbers have been productive members of our society and are a basic part of our workforce. Those who have established equities in the United States should be recognized and accorded legal status. At the same time, in so doing, we must not encourage illegal immigration. He granted amnesty or citizenship. I'm not sure if amnesty is the right word, so I'm not going to use it again. But he granted citizenship to every um, immigrant that was in the United States illegally. He gave him all citizenship in the 80s. This is like the Republican hero. They call him Saint Reagan. They love this man. So how come he wasn't criticized for that? Like, I never hear anybody bring that up when they talk about Reagan. Again, I'm speaking to Republicans specifically. I never hear anybody bring that up when they talk about how much they love this guy. Why? Because that's a pretty big deal. I'm just saying. So it seems like there is a little bit more now. And what I'm saying, and now this is for Democrats. We encourage that, right? We encourage the fact that they're the dreamers. There's people here who were brought over here by their parents, and this is the only home they know. And we recognize that a lot of our policies, especially in South America and Latin America, a lot of our policies sort of created that created the atmosphere for these drug cartels to be able to thrive. Our drug policies, making it illegal, pushing everything to the black market, makes it so that these cartels can thrive. Um, look up banana republics. You know how we go to other countries and steal their resources all the time. Um, so from the left wing perspective, we understand why people are trying to escape these countries. It's because they're looking for better opportunities, and their countries are basically being destroyed by us. So we recognize it from that perspective, and that's why we're more in favor of, allowing more people into the country and things of that nature. We're not as tough, I would say, on the whole immigration thing as, Republicans tend to be. And again, I understand their reasoning for it. I just also understand the reason why people want to leave these places. And I understand that it's our policies that created a lot of that. So, and I think that that's the general left wing perspective, which is why we're a little bit more, in favor of allowing people to stay here. So I ask all of you who are in favor of allowing people to stay here, why don't we give Reagan credit for that? Obviously, he was terrible in our opinion in other ways, really bad for the country. You know what I mean? Basically, he set the precedent of every president that has come after him. They've all essentially governed the exact same way he did. So we acknowledge that there's a lot of bad, but this was a good thing. In compare like speaking of policies that we agree with, this was a good thing. So sometimes somebody who's on the opposite side of you, if you consider yourself a Republican or a Democrat, you're going to agree with some of the stuff they do, and you should give them credit when they do those things, because it would encourage your side to want to continue to do those things. If good things are happening, it shouldn't matter from what side it's coming from. You should encourage the good thing to happen. This is public service, right? You're not in it for yourself, right? Right? I'll continue. So, sticking with Republicans, another thing that I hear from Republicans a lot is they're very concerned about the debt, the deficit, the budget, things of that nature, right? The economy as a whole, I would say. Not that everyone's not concerned with the economy, but I think that it's safe to say Republicans or right wingers probably talk about it more. I think that's fair. So, another very popular Republican president. He's been actually revived in recent times, as if he's not, one of the biggest war criminals of my lifetime for sure. But that's going to be Mr. George W. Bush. So let's look at this. National debt from 2001 to 2008, and this is in the trillions. It was $5.8 trillion dollars when. Okay, so no, let me see. Yeah, okay. So it was 5.8 trillion dollars when he took office, and then it was 10.7 trillion dollars by the time he left office. So it rose by 4.9 trillion dollars under George Bush. That was an 84% increase. Why wasn't the budget being discussed and the debt and the deficit and all that stuff when he was running it up? Is it because it was due to war and military and war and all that stuff takes precedent over the budget? Or did we just choose to conveniently ignore the fact that, you guys always talk about, oh, government spending, it's bad, we have to cut all that. But he rose it by that much, and where y'all at? If Obama raised it that much, everyone would be tripping. If Biden did that, everyone would be tripping. I don't hear anybody saying anything about Bush. I hear people who don't like Bush saying things about it, but general Republican people that I've spoken with, like younger ones, don't like Bush because younger ones typically are more anti-war as well. But like older Republicans I've spoken with, they'll tell me flat out, like, no, Bush was a decent president. Like, so this doesn't come into the equation. It only comes in the equation when it's a Democrat doing the spending. Got it. All right. So those are just a few examples I have of Republicans doing things that Democrats would ultimately be in favor of. Not necessarily blowing up the budget for the purposes of war. That's not necessarily one of them. But government spending, we're not opposed to that. Whereas, the right wing typically is. So that's three right wing people, presidents, who all have either made arguments or taken actions that would traditionally be considered lefty. So, again, not specifically in the case of war, just in the case of government spending in general. I just want to make that very clear. Okay. Moving on. Oh, wait. One last thing. One last thing. I'm glad I didn't forget this. Um, Republicans and right wing people really have a problem when you say that they're racist, right? Which I understand because I do, again, I live in Arizona, so I know a lot of people who vote Republican. I'm not even going to necessarily say that they're right wingers because, as most people are, it depends on the issue. You know what I mean? Most of them are pro LGBTQ rights. Most of them are pro. The ones that I've met personally is who I'm speaking about. But most of them are pro, women's rights. Most of them are pro, Black Lives Matter, all that kind of stuff, right? Like, you know. Um, but a lot of them still vote Republican, and they wonder why people call them racist, or say that it's racist to vote for Republicans. Um, and they get really upset when you say that they're racist. Um, well, I just want to show why people think that. You know, it goes beyond Kanye West telling George Bush, "Oh, you don't care about black people on TV." Yeah, black people felt that way, but it didn't take Kanye to say that. We already felt that way. Um, and we felt that way for a long time. I grew up like in an era where pretty much black people voted for Democrats. That's just what it was. We knew that the Republicans didn't have anything for us. Now, again, I was a kid in the 90s, so, now that I've grown up and I've been able to look back on history, And I see how everything unfolded. Obviously, the Democrats didn't have our backs either. But, um, yeah. So that's what it was at a certain time, though. And I think that because our parents grew up in the era where that was more true, um, that bled into the 90s, I guess you can say. And so, people were still had that mindset of, oh, if you're black, obviously you vote for Democrats. Like, duh. They're the pro union, pro worker, all that party, right? So, why does this stigma exist? Is the question. This is why. The RNC chief says it was wrong to exploit racial conflict for votes. So, this is from a Washington Post article from 2005. It was called the Southern Strategy, started under Richard M. Nixon in 1968, and it described Republican efforts to use race as a wedge issue on matters such as desegregation and busing to appeal to white Southern voters. Ken McMahon, the Republican National Committee chairman, this morning will tell the NAACP National Convention in Milwaukee that it was wrong. By the 1970s and into the 1980s, the Democratic Party solidified its gains in the African American community, and we Republicans did not effectively reach out, McMahon said in his prepared text. Some Republicans gave up on winning the African American vote, looking the other way, or trying to benefit politically from racial polarization. I am here today as the Republican chairman to tell you that we were wrong. So that is why black people and a lot of brown people feel that the Republican Party is racist. It's because they're self-admitted racist. That was the RNC chair. That's the leader of the Republican Party. That's not, if you're not the president. You know what I mean? Because he's running all the campaign stuff. So that person has a lot of power, and he apologized. I believe they apologized to Congress as well. So, or in Congress, I should say, because they are Congress. But so that's why. It's because you apologize for being racist. That's why. That's why we think Republicans are racist. That's why. That's the answer. So just to throw that out there. So I hope that clears everything up on that end. Now, Democrats, let's talk to you. So, why do you think that whenever you turn on any media on TV, MSNBC, ABC, Fox, what's the other one? CNN, they're basically all saying the same thing. When it comes to the actual really important things, right? Like, they're all saying the same thing at the end of the day. Like, you'll have one-off shows like Tucker Carlson on Fox, who, although says a bunch of nonsense that I disagree with the majority of the time, when he speaks about war and foreign policy, he's often correct. But he's the only show that's really allowed to speak about foreign policy in a way that actually would resolve conflict and not cause more war. So, with that being said, no other channels will have like anti-war voices on or anything like that, and they all pretty much are in alignment with, and this is across the board. Russia's evil. Putin tried to interfere with our elections. Putin, for no reason at all, decided to invade Ukraine. They were just minding their business and weren't doing anything wrong, and he just decided for no reason to invade. And so now we have to send all this money over to them, otherwise the blood of Ukrainians is somehow on our hands. Like, that's basically the message that you're going to get from every single network on TV. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that there are no news outlets, aside from YouTube channels, that will actually provide you a different perspective on what's going on? Why do you think that is? This is why, Democrats. Because when Bill Clinton took office, all of these, you see these numbers up here. All of these were independently owned are owned by much smaller entities spread out across the country. Look at those numbers: 1,500 newspapers, 1,100 magazines, 9,000 radio stations, 1,500 TV stations, and 2,400 book publishers are now currently all owned by five corporations. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 essentially removed the rules of monopoly from media. So there was a time where if you owned a newspaper and a TV station, then you weren't also allowed to own a magazine. Also, you see what I'm saying? Or if you owned a magazine and a newspaper, you were then not allowed to also own a TV station. You see what I'm saying? Those rules were eliminated in 1996 by Bill Clinton, so everything got consolidated now into five companies. I thought it was six. It's actually only five because everything buys everything else. You see what I'm saying? Like most of these TV stations that you watch, they're all owned by the same thing. Look at the name of MSNBC, Microsoft News Broadcasting. You know what I mean, or whatever NBC stands for. But it has Microsoft in front of the name. They were bought by Microsoft. So if Microsoft is doing any sort of shady business practices, do you think that that's going to get covered on the media that they own? Of course not. That's the problem. So Bill Clinton made that happen. I just want to put that out there. So another thing that Democrats don't like is war. Of course, we're anti-war. Uh, when I say Democrats, again, I'm talking about the voters, and I'm at a little more generally including the left, only for the purposes of this conversation, because I generally don't believe that Democrats are left wing. And I believe true lefties at this point aren't voting for Democrats. But something we don't like is war, right? That's a repeated theme that you hear on this show, and that I've even spoken about on this episode. That's a repeated theme. Well, who had the biggest military budget out of Republicans and Democrats in the last? We'll see how many years. Let's take a look. So going all the way back to Truman, who had the biggest military budget? It's Barack Obama, by far. Barack Obama has almost $100 billion more dollars in his military budget than George W. Bush. And George W. Bush is the man who started all those wars. All the modern day wars, I should say. Clinton had a really low military budget compared to everybody else, him and Carter. Now, obviously, you do see Reagan and H.W. Bush's are a little higher. And then W. Bush's goes up. Now, it is relatively. Democrats have lower ones than Republicans do. In general, Kennedy had a little bit higher of one. But look at Obama's. Why do you think he felt it necessary to ramp up the war so much? Were we under more of a threat of being attacked after we had bombed the Middle East for 8 years before he became president? Because we were there in 2002 is when we went to the Middle East initially, and we've been there ever since. It's 21 years at this point. So, why do we defend this? Why are people defending that and saying, and then reverse question, why is every Republican saying that the military got weaker under Obama? And they're saying, oh, that's why we had to get Trump in there to rebuild the military. What do you mean? Look at this again. Obama had the highest budget out of everybody. So what do you mean the military got weaker and it had to be rebuilt and all of this stuff under Obama? That doesn't make any sense. Please explain it to me. So that's a question for Republicans, and then a question for Democrats who are supposed to be anti-war is, why don't we call this out? Because he's a black guy, you don't want to feel like a racist? Like, I'll say it for you then. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't understand. Like, if you're doing a bad job and you're doing the things that the opposite of what we want you to do, we should call you out. So I didn't really hear too much of that, and Please explain why in the comments. If anybody wants to leave a comment, please explain why. Um, we also felt that the border wall was racist, right? That Trump was going to build. Um, well, he started construction on it, and then I remember when Joe Biden was running, he said not another foot of wall would be built. Um, and everybody kind of unanimously was saying, all it's racist. It's really a virtue signal anyway, because if people want to get here, they can just fly or they can dig under or whatever. But ultimately, the wall is racist and it's evil and all these things, right? We heard all of this, right? And I agree with those things. Like the wall is a stupid idea anyway. I'm okay with enforcing border security in a humane way. I don't know if we're capable of that in the government, but that's the ideal situation, because I do believe in a social safety net, and I think in order to have a social safety net, you have to have borders and citizenship and things like that. Like I do think those things are important, but um, I just wish there was a more humane way that we could deal with these issues to where we're not building giant fucking walls to try to keep people out of the country. Like that's crazy. Um anyway, so everybody on the left unanimously agreed that that was the case. It was racist, it was mean, it was horrible. Why would you do this, right? That was the consensus. Well, the border wall construction resumes under President Joe Biden. This is from The Intercept. That's the date of the article. You can read the whole thing for yourself. But the Biden administration laid out its plans to rev up work on completing Donald Trump's signature project. I live in Arizona. I can tell you that that's true. So that's true. Um, so my point in this video is Republicans. I've been hearing a lot of you saying that you disagree with Joe Biden's policies. That was Trump's number one policy, and a lot of you were cheerleading it. Why do you all of a sudden dislike it just because it's Joe Biden that's doing it? Democrats, when Ronald Reagan granted all the immigrants citizenship in the 80s, why is that a bad thing just because Reagan did it? When if Clinton did it, we would cheer it. If Obama did that, we would cheer it. But since Reagan did it, we just don't bring it up at all. When Clinton deregulates, Republicans, why aren't you happy about that? You love deregulation. You guys don't like regulations really at all. So when he deregulates the whole media industry, why do you not champion that? This is a question for Republicans and right wingers, because you guys are against deregulation, or you guys are against regulation rather. You're in favor of deregulation. So if that's the case, why aren't you championing Bill Clinton for what he did? On the flip side, Democrats, why are we not upset that he did this? Because we're in favor of regulations generally. So these are just the questions that I have. Republicans, Dwight D. Eisenhower said, beware the military industrial complex that could gain too much power. Do you disagree with that? Or do you agree with it because a Republican said it, but if a Democrat says it, then you disagree with it? Because that's what I see a lot of. Obama somehow weakened the military by having the biggest military budget ever. Please explain to me in the comments, like right wingers, left wingers, if you're seeing anything that you disagree with based on what I said and what I showed you, please explain why you disagree with it. Am I misrepresenting anything? Like, let me know, because I'm genuinely confused at this a lot of the time. Because I will give credit to somebody if they do something that I agree with, even if I don't agree with other things that they do. When Donald Trump called out the CIA and the FBI and all of them and said that there's a deep state of people, blah, blah, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's true. That's true. And we had been saying that for years, but all of a sudden, because Trump says it, now it's a conspiracy theory? This is my point. Sometimes people who you disagree with are going to say things that you agree with, and they're going to do things that you agree with. You should encourage that behavior because ultimately, if you agree with the action, then isn't that making the country better ultimately? Even if it's coming from somebody you disagree with? If a racist person is able to stop a war from happening, then that's a good thing. Despite the fact that I may not like him personally, I'm still happy that he stopped a war and saved a bunch of lives. That's the point. We have to look at policies, not personalities. Policies over personalities. That's the point of this episode. So, if you learned something new, please like, share, and subscribe. We drop episodes every Saturday right here on the Ethos Media Network. This is Shane G, and I will be back next Saturday with another episode of Politics as Usual. Again, if you have any, feedback for me, please leave it in the comments. You can follow us on Instagram at Ethos Media Network as well. And I'll catch you next Saturday, man. I definitely appreciate all the new subscribers. Help get us to 500, everybody. Catch you next week. Peace.